Hello Magic players, this is Jumbo Commander, and I'm super excited because the first preview cards for Amonkhet are out. My Amonkhet deck tech for this week is Hazoret the Fervent. 3 in a red for a 5/4 legendary god. He is indestructible, has haste, but can't attack or block unless you have 1 or fewer cards in hand. He does have an activated ability. 2 in a red, discard a card. Hazoret deals 2 damage to each opponent. Oh, wow, that is quite a drawback. You know, this commander had me racking my brain to figure out how I could approach him, and he just doesn't sound that good until I thought about a few mechanics that could make him better. How about the classic mechanics of Madness and Hellbent? First up, we have Avacyn's Judgment. A simple 2 damage, but when you Madness it, then you can spread the damage around however you like. Or Fiery Temper. Normally 3 mana for an instant 3 damage, but if you discard it, you can pay it for its Madness cost and do a Lightning Bolt. All right. Guys, I'm just not into this. These cards aren't that great. You have to pay 3 to discard Fiery Temper, plus another 1 to Madness, so you're paying 4 mana to do 5 damage. I'm just not okay with that. Lightning Bolt was never a playable card in Commander. These Madness enablers aren't even that good, and I'm not going to get into talking about, discarding vampires for just throwing out 2 damage. It just doesn't work. What about Hellbent? Let's take a look at Hellbent. One of the best examples of Hellbent, Gathan Raiders. 3 red for a 3/3, but when he's Hellbent, he's a 5/5. He's a 5 mana 5/5. I mean, the rates that we're talking about for Madness and Hellbent just aren't there. So what happens if we just kind of throw money at the problem? Let's talk about Mox Diamond. This will let us ramp while reducing our hand size, and it only costs like $75 right now. That's a deal. How about Bazaar of Baghdad? You can decrease your hand size while drawing crazy amounts of cards, and this one only costs like $650. Or Lion's Eye Diamond, topping out just over $100, empties your hand immediately. All of these will get around Hazoret's horrible restriction and allow him to attack for just 5 damage. Okay, we're gonna scrap all this. We're scrapping Madness, we're scrapping Hellbent. We're not throwing any extra money into this. That's just silly. I've got a better idea. Hazoret with 99 mountains. Done. That's it. We're gonna then mulligan down to 4. Okay, and then we'll be able to play Hazoret on turn 4 and swing an attack. And hopefully one of our opponents will stumble and we'll win that way. I would also like to point out all of the classy choices I made for mountains to include in this deck. We got Euro lands and APAC lands and Arabian Nights mountains and ones drawn by amazing artists. I mean, clearly I spent way too much time looking at basic mountains to put in this deck. But by the way, guys, there's a basic land viewer in existence. You just type that into Google. It's awesome. And you can just get your best art, because in a 99 mountain deck, you really need to have a lot of thought go into what mountains you choose. Come on, show some respect for your deck. If we're going to do a 1 commander 99 mountains, why don't we do 98 mountains and include something like Seismic Assault? Okay, I can handle that. 98 mountains, Seismic Assault in your commander. Well, if I'm going to do that, why don't I include another card called Land's Edge, which is amazing. It's an enchant world, and any player can discard a land card to deal 2 damage. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's a Seismic Assault for everyone, and you just throw shocks all over the place with your lands. I just got to fit in one more card. How about Lightning Storm? 1 and 2 red for an instant that deals X plus 3 damage, and then you discard a land to put charge counters on the instant you just cast, and then you give your opponents a chance to also discard lands and make your Lightning Storm even bigger, and then you can respond to that, making it even bigger. And then everyone gets to resolve a crazy large spell that does a ton of damage all over the battlefield. But then we get the added benefit of discarding a land. I don't know. It's just a crazy card, and I want to put it in, so there. And you know what? Why not include Flame Shot? If we're just throwing mountains away, have a deck full of mountains, let's do a little bit of extra burn and have a free spell. Get those mountains out of our hand so we can attack with our general. Do you know what this is sounding like? This is sounding like a deck I have never built before, and that is EDH Burn. That's right, I'm going to take a stab at a burn deck that's probably going to be horrible, but just might be spectacular. So one of my first inclusions is a card like Lightning Bolt, which normally would be awful, but one thing that we're looking for in this deck is the ability to empty our hand very quickly, and Lightning Bolt is great at that. You just cast it away as soon as you get it, and then that will be one less card in your hand so that you can attack with your commander. Let's keep going with a card like Fire Blast. Although it's very expensive to cast and could be prohibitive for casting your commander on time, Fire Blast is great because if you're drawing multiple cards later in the game, you can just Fire Blast someone for free, sacking useless mountains. And Firebolt. Firebolt's easy to shoot off in the early game and then have the added ability of flashback later in the game. But I gotta say, an all-star in any burn deck, not any burn deck, an all-star in just this burn deck is Firestorm. Red, choose and discard X cards. Fire damage deals X damage to each of X target creatures or players. So let's say you Firestorm, discarding 4 cards. You deal 4 damage to 4 different sources. And your hand is empty, so you can attack with your commander. Firestorm is actually like a really usable and cool card, and it works so well in this deck. Let's keep going with some classic burn cards. How about Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle? This is just going to shock your opponents because we're not quite at like 99 lands anymore, but we're at a huge and ridiculously stupid high mountain count. So Valakut's going to be turned on and we're just going to be throwing bolts everywhere. Or how about Conflagurate? It's a little bit expensive to cast at first, but its flashback allows you to discard cards in order to get damage, spread it around. And one thing I like a lot is that you can just pay red and just chuck it into the graveyard, getting it out of your hand, allowing your commander to attack. You also might want to consider other flashback spells like Devil's Play. There's a lot of burn spells in the world, and you could throw a lot more in here, but I'm leaving a lot of them out. I'm going to see what it's like with a much higher mana count and see how that goes. But I did want to include maybe a few Planeswalkers. I specifically wanted to include Koth of the Hammer, not just because Koth can be really aggressive and untap your mountains and have them attack, but I really like the idea of having the mountains kill your opponent, and Koth's emblem is great. It's also another way to really mise a win from an opponent. If you can just protect a Koth for a few turns, you kind of just win the game with his emblem. But we could also expand to a few other Planeswalkers. Consider Chandra Pyromaster. Chandra draws you a card without putting that card in your hand. That is going to be a key feature of this deck, to be able to get card advantage without actually drawing the card, and that lets your commander keep attacking. Speaking of attacking, that's going to be how we're going to be doing a lot of damage, and so Chandra Pyromaster's plus ability, preventing a creature from blocking, is going to be particularly useful. I also like Chandra Torch of Defiance, because again, it does that card draw without putting it into your hand, and has that added benefit of doing a little bit of extra damage as we activate her. But now we've kind of transitioned away from burn and into a little bit of card advantage, but as I like to call it, card disadvantage. Let's talk about some ways that we can discard cards, that we can get them out of our hand, cycle through them. I mean, let's just do some crazy stuff with cards. And first up, we have Faithless Looting, a classic in Commander and a really great card, although it is card disadvantage. You spend a card to draw 2 and discard 2. But Faithless Looting is great because it has flashback. In this deck, it's particularly good because it can get cards out of your hand and into your graveyard and sort of cycle through your deck. Dangerous Wager is quite dangerous. Discard your hand, draw 2 cards. So let's just say that you need to get your commander online and attacking. Let's say it discards your handful of mountains, you draw 2 more mountains, you play a mountain, and suddenly your commander can attack. Dangerous Wager is going to be great for getting around some of those weird mana blocks that this deck can give you. Even though Cathartic Reunion just cards selection, so you can throw lands away and then hopefully draw into, well, statistically more mountains. But anyways, Burning Inquiry. Burning Inquiry is another weird one. Each player draws 3 cards and discards 3 cards at random. Odds are you're going to draw mountains and discard mountains. It's not going to hurt you at all, but it could just destroy your opponent's plans, and it's super fun to watch all of your friends be miserable as their hands get destroyed by your red card draw spell. Another thing that feels similar to Burning Inquiry is Gamble, and Gamble's great. You can imagine that in a deck that's over half mountains, you might need a tutor, even if it is a risky tutor. And I've got to say, there's some cards in this deck that have such good synergies, you're going to want to gamble them out. But I do have to say there's a drawback to Gamble, because later on in the game, if you're top decking, and by the way, you're hellbent in this deck a lot, so you might be top decking, a Gamble doesn't do anything because you're going to play it and then throw that card away. Well, maybe you get a Faithless Looting, or maybe you get a Devil's Play or something else that goes really well into your graveyard. Or you maybe even get a Squee Goblin Nabob. Squee can just be cycled over and over again with your commander, so you can basically chuck him, dealing 2 damage, then get him back again. I have to talk about just a little bit of card advantage that works really well with your commander, and the first is Avaricious Dragon. This dragon has a huge drawback. At the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. Wow. But Avaricious Dragon has a really great upside, because at the beginning of your draw step, you draw an additional card. By the time we get to 4 mana, we might have discarded a lot of our hand, and so the drawback doesn't really matter, and we can have that forward momentum as we draw more than 1 card. The only problem is there's lots of mountains in this deck, so if we draw too many mountains, we could get clogged with cards in our hand and then not be able to attack with our commander. Oh wait though, Avaricious Dragon gets us out of that by letting us discard at the end of our end step. Key to the City is also a great key to discard. Not only can we get cards out of our hand and then maybe replace them later when we have more resources to use the cards, but also it can give our commander unblockable. And that might be the way we need to win, is by getting our commander in a few times and doing some commander damage. I have to share with you the most spectacular card in this deck, the All-Star. The reason why I put Inventor's Fair in this deck, Girapur Orrery. What? Girapur Orrery is the star of the deck? Yes, it is. Each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns. That's fine. Get some lands out of your hand. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. Oh my gosh. We're just going to draw 4 cards a turn and have all these outlets to just toss them away. We have lots of ways to get cards out of our hand, and so the Girapur Orrery's ability to draw us tons of cards and cycle through our deck is just insane. And you know it's going to be a powerful card because it's sitting at 4. Cards above 3 are going to be really tricky to get out of our hand before our general comes down. We want our general to come down early. So every card that we include that has CMC 4 or greater has to pull its weight, and Girapur Orrery is amazing. Let's talk about a few other modes of card advantage, like Outpost Siege. I like the ability to draw without having cards in our hand. Speaking of which, Stromkirk Occultist has a great ability because it has Madness. This has got to be the best Madness card. Madness, and when it deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library and I can play that card. So it's the drawing without drawing, and it also has Madness. Oh, it's like the perfect combination of cards with this deck. I've also got to say that Throne of the High City is going to be great. Having the Monarch in a deck where you're attacking a lot is going to be really powerful. We might also want to refill our hand occasionally, but we're going to want to have control over how we refill our hand. That's why cards like Memory Jar, Magus of the Wheel, and Runeborn Hellkite, all of them are wheel effects, allowing us to go from no cards all the way up to a full hand, but we can have control over when we do it. We could even attack with our general and then pop a Memory Jar or a Magus of the Wheel, allowing us to refill our hand. And Runehorn Hellkite is great. We have so many discard outlets. We can just get this dragon out of our hand and then way late in the game, exile him in order to get back up to 7 cards and gain the tempo back again. I mean, speaking of tempo, we are going to want to have some card draw in this deck. We're throwing away resources, so we're going to want to be able to get them back, and these cards get our resources back. The best mana rocks for this deck are ones that we can cash in later. Commander Sphere and Mind Stone are going to be particularly good because this deck is full of mountains and not huge spells. So we might play a Commander Sphere in order to ramp our commander and do a lot of damage and then cash it in for another card when that card isn't going to hurt us. Same thing goes with Mind Stone, and Cultivator's Caravan could be an out to allow our commander to crew this vehicle and actually attack without technically attacking. Now, I looked at some other vehicles, and there are powerful vehicles out there, but I really wanted like a cool, powerful vehicle with Crew 5, and there really aren't very many. If you want to throw in a few vehicles to use with your commander, go for it. I think it's really fun, but I'm sticking with just Cultivator's Caravan. I have another card that gives us some great card advantage, and it's a land, and it's Seagate Wreckage. The downside is nothing, and the upside is tremendous. 2 and a colorless, draw a card, activate this ability only if you have no cards in hand. That happens all the time. I'm Hellbent all the time, so I'm going to be able to draw a card and then Seagate Wreckage over and over again. Now, I was really worried that this deck would be so stagnant I would never be able to draw a card. But with all of these different abilities coming together, I'm just going to burn through cards and then keep drawing 2 or 3 a turn. Hopefully. Because this plan is really delicate. Burn is very difficult. We're going to need to find some way to disrupt our opponent, or else they're just going to run all over us. So we need some great disruption. And some of the best disruption is inspired by Modern. How about Blood Moon? That's a nice thing to do to your opponent. Let's make sure that they have a horrible time casting their spells, and then our general comes down quickly and beats them to death. So Magus of the Moon and Blood Moon are expensive cards for a deck that's a little bit janky, but could just win you a game, almost like that Koth. You know, they could just mise you a game instantly. And, you know, we can keep on that disruption train with cards like Devastating Dreams. Let me talk about this. As an additional cost to play Devastating Dreams, discard X cards at random from your hand. We love discarding cards. Okay, let's see what we get. Each player sacrifices X lands, and it deals X damage to each creature. So we could end up being empty-handed with this Devastating Dreams. Let's pay 2, discard a bunch of cards, destroy lands, deal damage to creatures, but our general is indestructible. Woohoo! Wiping the board and then just letting our general go crazy. It works perfectly. Let's keep going. Scorched Earth. Choose and discard X lands. We will have a lot of lands. This deck ended up running like 60 lands. It's crazy. We will have enough. So Scorched Earth says discard X lands, destroy X lands. So we can start taxing our opponent, destroying lands, and then letting our general just get in for those 21 commander damage. Let's just throw a few other lands that can help out, like Wasteland, Dust Bowl, Strip Mine, Tectonic Edge. We could just go a little bit of land disruption to just throw them off a little bit, because honestly, it's not going to take much to stop this deck cold. Actually, it'll just take a 6/6. Just a 6/6 on the ground will stop this deck cold, as you know, your commander just can't get through. As we desperately like start top decking for a Rogue's Passage or a Key to the City or something like that. Like, there are a lot of things that can just stonewall this deck, so we need to have this amount of disruption. Let's keep going. If you are playing against a lot of blue in your meta, Jaya Ballard Taskmage could be a great card. Also, Null Brooch is a really great card because it takes away the downside. 2 and a tap, discard your hand, counter target non-creature spell. That's it. So if you don't have a hand, it's just 2 tap, negate. on an artifact. It's great. You can just sort of control the board and disrupt people as you're just beating them down and trying to burn them out. Because with every card you draw, it's kind of like just 2 damage to the table. Now let's take a step back. This deck is not very good. But I've tried it. I've play tested it through. I've done a lot of stuff on TappedOut, and I encourage you to go over to TappedOut and do a few play tests. Remember to aggressively mulligan, but the deck is pretty fun, and I don't feel like I'm running low on cards a lot of the time. I think it's pretty well balanced. It's kind of insane. You would not expect this commander to work, and it does. I do want to say that if you like this style a little bit and you want a more reliable commander, please consider Ashling the Pilgrim. Ashling's awesome. Let me go ahead and read him. He's 1 in a red for a 1/1 legendary elemental shaman. And for 2, 1 in red, put a +1/+1 counter on Ashling. And if this is the 3rd time this resolved this turn, you just wipe off all the +1/+1 counters, and then it just deals that much damage to each creature and player. So a lot of people sort of just run a ton of lands, and you just kind of pump up your Ashling, and then you can do stuff like give him lifelink or do some crazy things. Ashling could go in this deck really, really well. But I don't know. I think that this discard mechanic and playing with throwing cards in your graveyard and getting them back is really fun. I'm really excited about the weird and interesting cards that can be found in this deck, like Land's Edge. I haven't played that before, or even I've never even heard of Lightning Storm, the card where you can discard a land to like add charge counters and it goes to other people. I mean, it's crazy. I've played Firestorm before, but never in EDH. I think that's going to be fun. You know, Modern Dredge plays Conflagurate, but it's going to be great in Commander to be able to play it. I've never cast Lightning Bolt at a Commander table. I just haven't. I think it's going to be great to just be like, bolt you, especially if it's the last 3 points of damage. I would really like that. And a ton of other really interesting cards. And I know a lot of the cards on this list are going to be a little bit expensive, specifically Magus of the Moon, Blood Moon is going to be expensive. Obviously, those 3 cards I mentioned in the beginning, please don't include those. Those aren't a necessity at all. But there are a few expensive cards on here. Feel free to cut those and find other ways to disrupt your opponent. This could be a very good budget deck where you just kind of throw some cards you have together, buy a few 10-cent old cards, and just see what this new god can do. I looked at this god and thought he was a stinker. I was like, oh, how am I going to make a video on this stupid mono red guy? And he turned out to be way more interesting and way more fun than I thought. So it just goes to show, you know, you give these cards a chance and they could surprise you. All right, everyone, this has been Jumbo Commander with another Commander deck tech of Amonkhet cards. Oh my gosh, and there are more to come. I'm making this video when only 1 card has been spoiled. One of the legendaries have been spoiled, and I'm looking forward to the other ones so much. And I will have videos on all of them. So please check back in next Wednesday when I'll have something new. I don't even know what it's going to be. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. All right, guys, enjoy preview season. Keep an eye out for those spoilers, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Bye-bye.